Hi, good evening. Welcome to Community Homeworks Workshop this evening. We are glad you're joining us. My name is Jason Byler. I am the Education Manager here at Community Homeworks. So I'm the one who gets to choose which programs we're going to do each week. If you have a suggestion for something you would like to learn about at one of our programs, please send it to us. Our email address is education@communityhomeworks.org. That will be scrolling across the screen in a little while if it's not yet. Um, Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We have a mission to empower low-income homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. So basically, we want people to learn how to take care of their homes, learn how to be more sustainable. So whether that be growing your own food or saving on energy bills, anything like that, we want you to be able to do that. And we also want you to have safe homes, have a safe home, and be proud of your home. So those things are all important to us. If you're joining us live this evening, we would ask that you join in the conversation, and you can do that by going down to the bottom of your screen and clicking on comment and putting a comment in the comment section, and we will then we can bring that up on the screen, and we can have our instructor see that as well. So if you have questions to ask or want to share your experience with our subject tonight, which is composting, please do that. Also, if you wouldn't mind, put in the comment section where you are joining us from. If you're joining us from Edison neighborhood, or if you're joining us from Hickory Corners, or wherever you're from, let us know. We want to know where people are joining us from. Tonight's workshop, we are going to be talking about composting at home. And our instructor is Mandy Dixon. Mandy has joined us for several other classes as well. Let's see if I can get Mandy to come up here. There we go. There's Mandy. Mandy is joining us from home. I am at our headquarters on Bryant Street in Kalamazoo. Mandy is a Master Gardener with the MSU Extension Master Gardener program and has taught us a lot about gardening and what to do to keep our plants healthy and all that kind of thing. But tonight she is our composting guru. So welcome, Mandy. Anything I forgot to mention?
No, I think you're doing great. It's going to be a fun
Okay,
one. We're getting green just before St. Patty's Day.
that's right.
So, yeah, let's talk composting.
All
So,
right.
composting is kind of a fun, easy way of getting your nutrients to your garden, really, and reusing some of your kitchen scraps and things around your house. So, if we go to the first slide, we're just going to do a little bit of a definition of composting so we can get you started. Composting is decomposed organic material. So, like I was talking about your vegetable scraps from your kitchen, your potato peelings, your leaves. When it breaks down, it turns into humus, and that helps improve garden nutrients and soil structure. Now, how does that happen? It takes place because there's fungi and bacteria and worms and bugs all in this compost, and it breaks it down into the bare materials. Um, a lot of people call it black gold because it's so useful in your garden. So let's go to the next slide. And I brought this in here, keep calm and compost. But the real message here is that this is from the University of Idaho, and they show that 68% of waste that's thrown away on a college campus can be recycled or composted. So imagine if you could take 68% of your household waste and get rid of it, recycle it, compost it, you wouldn't be throwing nearly as much away. And that helps the environment. So let's go to the next slide. So, why compost? We talked a little bit about it, but let's go into it just a little bit further. We're going to do some recycling. When you take your compost, all of your waste from your kitchen, instead of throwing it in the trash, we throw it in our compost bin, pile, whatever we're going to do. We'll talk about that here in a minute. You're actually doing a form of recycling because you're going to be able to reuse that material in a different form. It improves, once it's done, it improves your soil nutrients and your soil structure. And you don't have to buy chemical fertilizers as often because you're using that nutrients that are right in the scraps of the food that you've just tossed in your pile. You benefit your soil health because this rich nutrient filled Compost can actually help with your soil structure so it doesn't get compacted. It holds water better. You don't have as much dryness. It's convenient because you can do it right at your house. You can do it anywhere that you live. You can do it in your house if you set it up correctly. You can do it on your porch, on your deck, and it's free. You can pretty much compost without any expense out of your pocket. So let's go to the next slide and watch a video. So this video that I want to introduce you just talks about how easy composting can be. So it's a real short video. This is just going to give you a little taste of how you can compost at your house, how easy it is.
One of the biggest reasons most people don't compost or quit too soon is because they think it's too complicated. But I'm here to tell you, making compost at home couldn't be easier because it only comes down to 3 simple steps. So in this video, I'll walk you through those 3 important steps and get you composting with confidence in no time. While the recipe for making compost at home might seem surprisingly simple, it's the essence of classic composting that even the professionals use. There are just 4 ingredients you need to make compost: air, water, carbon, known as browns, and nitrogen, known as greens. Browns include leaves, twigs, paper, and cardboard. Greens include grass clippings, vegetable scraps, garden trimmings, and coffee grounds. And I know what you're thinking, coffee grounds are brown in color. True, but they're still considered green because they're high in nitrogen, so don't let the physical color throw you. Build your compost heap or pile in a convenient place that has access to water. Continue to add whatever greens or browns you can get your hands on until the pile is approximately 4 feet tall and wide. That's considered an ideal size for home composting to work efficiently. Just never add meat, dairy, or grease. As the pile is building and beyond the time that it reaches ideal size, mix it often. Once a week is good, and while you're mixing it, add water to keep it moist, about like a damp sponge. Once the pile reaches the ideal size of 4 by 4, start a new pile and repeat the process. For the original pile, don't add any new ingredients to it. That's what the new pile is for. But keep turning the original pile while adding moisture about once a week. In approximately 3 months, if you keep with it, the greens and browns will biodegrade to finished compost. You'll know when it's ready when the ingredients are unrecognizable, the internal temperature is ambient, and the contents smell rich and earthy. That is finished compost. And when your compost is ready to use, you can top dress it to an existing bed around your plants about 1 inch thick, or if it's a new bed, you can add it to that soil about 4 inches deep and just mix it all together. Fortunately, a little bit goes a long way. But this recipe for success will not only get you started, but keep you going strong for years to come. And we have a lot more information about composting on our YouTube channel at Joe Gardener TV and on our website at joegardener.com. So come on over and have a look around, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay, so that is composting in a very easy, very simple way. And that's what I wanted to show you is how easy this could be. I'm going to go into a little more detail for you so you can, feel a little more comfortable with some of the finer points. But realistically, all it is put your stuff in a pile and turn it and get it a little moist. So let's go to the next slide and talk about that. So he talked about the browns and the greens. So you have to have both items in your compost pile or you're going to end up with a lot of smell. It's going to take a lot longer to break down. Browns are your carbon sources, like your dead leaves, your branches, your twigs, your cardboard. And your greens are your nitrogen sources, like your grass clippings, anything that's kind of was living recently, or it's basically high in nitrogen. So like your veggie scraps, your fruit scraps, your coffee grounds, um, green grass clippings. The dried stuff is your dried leaves and dried branches, and dried grass clippings are considered your brown sources. So let's go to you need both in your pile in order to make this work. So go ahead into the next slide. Now, there are some things you can't throw in your pile. You can throw a lot of things in your pile, but don't put in meat, bones, or fish scraps. You're just going to attract pests. It's going to smell. It's not going to break down correctly. We don't have, at least not in your home pile. Don't put in perennial weeds or diseased plants because you don't want to put that stuff. It Our piles at home don't get hot enough to break that down to kill it. So you're just going to put that stuff right back into your garden if you're using your compost. So you don't want to put any diseases and you don't want to put anything perennials because it just won't get hot enough to break that to kill those. Um, you also don't want your pile to dry out because if it's going to dry out, you're just going to kill the bacteria and the fungi that are doing the work for you. So you really need to keep that moist, but not soaked. They suggest you do it like it's a damp sponge. And don't forget to turn your compost pile because it allows oxygen to work in the pile. And it allows it to break it down faster. So you don't want to let it get dry, but you also need to make sure there's oxygen in it. So you have to flip it. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about just a real brief nutshell of things that can be composted and should not be. So we talked about cardboard, coffee grounds, eggs, shells, fireplace ashes, but only from natural wood, not from pressure treated wood, things like that. Fruits and veggies, grass, hair and fur, hay and straw, houseplants, leaves, newspaper, nutshells, paper, tea bags, wood chips. You can use a lot of things. I do suggest you break them all down. So don't throw a big old head of cabbage. Break that down, cut it in pieces, chunks, so that you have smaller, more manageable things in your garden because it'll break down faster for you. Don't compost your black walnut leaves or twigs, charcoal ash, because charcoal has a lot of different chemicals that could damage your plants, dairy products and eggs. Again, we talked about diseased, but also insect-retted plants. We don't want to put that stuff in there because it's not going to get hot enough at your house to break it down. Fats, grease, oils we've talked about. Meat and fish bones we talked about. Um, Pet feces or litter because again, it's not going to get hot enough. It's not going to break it down, and you could potentially give yourself diseases from that. Yard trimmings treated with chemical pesticides. So if you are treating your lawn with pesticides, don't put those clippings in your compost pile. So let's go to the next slide. The real basic cold composting is kind of what the video is talking about. It's basically you just take your stuff from your kitchen and from your yard, just throw it in a pile, make it 4x4. Um, Mix it whenever you have time. Make sure you keep it moist, but you're not doing anything. By the next season, you'll have usable compost material. You're just going to kind of sit it there. You'll turn it every so often when you think about it. And that perfectly works great. And it's easy. That's one of the fabulous things about cold composting is it's easy. It will eventually warm up as it starts breaking down, but it takes a lot longer because you're not constantly turning it. You're not constantly watching. You're not monitoring how much of each you put in. But it is a little slower. It does take some space. And you could end up with a smelly pile if you don't keep up with it, but it won't, it's outside, it's close to your house, but not so close that it's going to bother you. So these are some of the pros and cons. Um, I see a couple of questions. So, why not walnut tree leaves? Because the black walnut specifically has chemicals in its roots and its tree and its leaves that could potentially slow or inhibit growth. So, that is just the primary reason. If you had just a few in there, I don't think it really matters, but you don't want to go under your black walnut tree and scoop all those leaves up and put it in your compost pile only for you not to be able to germinate your spinach next year because you put that in your garden. So that is the primary reason. And I'm happy to see a couple people who really want to do composting. I'm excited. That's going to be a fun experiment for everybody. And I know that Jason said you want to see where people are from, so make sure you comment. Let us know where you're coming from. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about hot composting next. Now, there's only a few differences between cold composting and hot composting. Hot composting produces your compost within 6 to 8 weeks. Your cold composting is, you'll get it in a season. So if you do it this summer, you'll have next spring, you'll have good set of compost to go ahead and put on your garden. The hot composting is a little more detailed. You're going to mix your browns and greens. So your browns has to be twice as much or 3 times as much as your greens. So if you have your kitchen scraps in there and you're putting in almost all those kitchen scraps, you're not including things like cardboard, you're not including things like dried leaves, um, then you're going to end up slowing your compost down. You're going to end up with cold compost. So if you have a lot of those browns in your pile, you're going to end up speeding up that composting. Mix the pile every week. For hot composting, you really need to keep that oxygen in there, so you really need to keep it mixed. And you're going to want to check at that same time the moisture level of the pile and keep it that wet sponge. Cool composting, we were just kind of make sure you keep it a little wet, make sure you mix it whenever you can, and you just let it sit over the season. But for hot composting, we're really trying to get that going quickly. We're going to make that ratio of browns to greens. You're going to make sure you have a lot of those browns in there, so it's more than the greens. And you're going to make sure you check it every single week and mix it and keep it moist. The pros on that is it's going to be a lot faster. You're going to have a quicker turnaround to compost. But it does take some space because you can't just throw everything in there and then come back to it in the spring. You're going to need to have at least a second pile so that you can keep turning the first one and not keep adding new stuff to it. You'll have to put it in a separate pile. And it does take some space because of that. And it does require some extra time because you're going to have to monitor it more. So that's the only real difference between hot and cold. You pretty much could do cold, you know, as a, it's almost the same, but just a little more stringent requirements, just trying to keep it a little more um, on track. So just keep that in mind. If you really don't want to spend a lot of energy on it, just do your cold compost because you're still going to have some great results. Let's go to the next slide. Now, one of the other methods that we have that you can use to compost is called vermicomposting, and it's basically using worms to make your compost. Now, there are going to be some drawbacks as, because you're going to have to manage this whole process. You're going to have your bins and you're going to have food scraps and newspaper. So your newspaper is going to turn into your browns to a degree, and it's going to provide bedding and a little bit of air, help with the airflow in the bins. And then you're going to put your food scraps in there and your red worms in there. And what's going to happen is the red worms are going to eat those food scraps and digest that, and it's going to create compost. You do have to make sure there's oxygen in there. So you have to create some sort of method for oxygen to be in the bin. There may be liquids in there, so you sometimes have to drain that off. Can be kind of slimy, but it does still do the trick. You can do it even in the winter. So if you put it in your, in a unoccupied basement or in your garage, as long as it doesn't freeze, you can theoretically do it in your house as well. And there's a lot of tricks and tips and lots of different ways to do it. Some people are very successful with it. There's a person in my garden club that has 2 or 3 of these bins, and he has so many extra worms that he brings them in because worms multiply like crazy. If you have 6 red worms, they say you can get as many as 1,000 worms in just a short period of time. Like 6 months, you'll have 1,000 worms. So they are very prolific, and they will end up with some really nice compost. Let's go to the next slide. Now, you can't use the worms out of your garden, though. You have to use the red worms. Now, the red worms are also bait worms. So if you find a fishing shop that's selling bait, just make sure they're selling you red worms and you can use those. These worms will eat almost anything. They're going to eat your scraps like we were talking about. They'll also eat bread and grain products. They'll eat tea bags, they'll eat coffee grounds, filters, anything that's not greasy. They can't break down meat, bones, fat, dairy, greasy foods, and of course, your plastics, rubber band and stuff. But you can pretty much throw everything else in your pile in the buckets and they will eat them. There is a couple of, there's a wonderful article there. If you can open that, Jason, that'd be great. If you can't, you can't. We can do it later. This can be done indoors year round. Like I said, you just have to set up your system so that you're comfortable with it and that you're feeling that you've got it down so you're not going to have a lot of smell and a lot of problems when you do bring it in the house. So you kind of want to start that in the spring and test it out through the summer before you bring it in your house because everyone has a different way of doing it. Now, this is a Michigan University State website. You can just go up and find the website, which you can Google. And on the top, there's a search bar there. So you can just type in vermicomposting or worm composting, and they'll have articles like this one. So this one's a smart winter compost option. So they talk about how you can get this in your house while your bins outside are frozen solid. So if you just go through stuff like this, they tell you how to do it, how to use drainage, what kind of worms to do, and they discuss all the temperatures. And so if you're interested in worm composting, there are several resources. This is one of them, and I've got a few more linked at the bottom of this slideshow as well. So we'll get to that a little later. So we'll go back to the slideshow, and we talked about worm composting. I've got company. So let's go to the next slide. There's other kinds of composting. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there are other types of composting as well that you might be interested in. Now, if you think the cold composting outside is still too much work, you could just dig a hole, drop your stuff in there, cover it up, and that will break down because nature knows how to break things down. So it'll break down and it'll take care of that area. So that is an option. If you choose to go that way, that's the simplest option. Again, don't include meat, bones, that kind of stuff, but everything else can go in your pile or in your buried hole. And that will break down and it'll provide nutrients to right that area. The next type of composting is called hugelkultur. And it's a very interesting concept, and it's used often in permaculture, which I'm not going to get into too much right now, but I will talk about the hugelkultur composting method. So for this hugelkultur, they're creating a environment for your plants to grow in that's almost sustaining itself. So what they do is they'll throw a layer of hardwood, so nice hard solid wood at the bottom. They're going to serve some softer, little older, little bit softer woods right on top of it. They're going to put some rotten wood or some broken down wood and sticks on top of that, and then they're going to put a layer of leaves, grasses, and stuff right over the whole pile. And then they're going to throw some soil, some compost on top of that. So now you've got this great big old mound. And in this mound, you have all these different stages of things that are already composting. But it's going to take a really long time to get all the way to the bottom because you've got those great big old hardwoods that are going to take years to decompose. So as these things decompose, there's a little bit of liquid involved. So there's a little bit of moisture that's in this pile. And you're breaking down and creating compost in this pile. And you grow right on this hill. So you can put your tomatoes on the top, you can put your beans, your whatever lettuces at eye level. It's all in this pile and it stays very moist because compost retains water, but not too much, so it doesn't like actually get soggy. It just holds water nicely. It and it stays moist a lot longer than your regular garden bed will. In addition to that, it's constantly feeding itself. So it's like a sustainable environment all by itself in this pile. So you get a lot more production. Now, the big thing with this, though, is it does take a lot of space. You can't just do a little bitty pile and expect it to really do as much as you like. So you have to have a decent sized bed of this, and this is your growing surface. So you're actually creating almost a garden bed. And this is how you're going to do your vegetable gardening in this case. So it's just an interesting concept. It's really interesting to learn about. I want to try this out in a couple of raised beds next year. But it's you can find a lot of information on the internet, and a lot of it's tied into permaculture. So if you're interested, make sure you take a look, Google it, and you'll find some interesting articles on how to actually set these up. Another type of composting that I'm sure you've seen on the internet, you've seen them ads, you've seen them in the garden centers, is tumblers. So they're basically just your bin. You have a bin, and you throw your scraps in this bin and you rotate it. So you're keeping, and it's got usually vents in it. So you keep the air going, you're mixing it, you spray a little water in there once in a while. So it's basically just speeding up the process because you're doing a hot compost pile in a bin. It's convenient because you can put it right outside of your door, you seal it, so you're not really going to smell anything 'cause it's outside. So that is a nice benefit. They usually are smaller, so you can't do as much at once. And you still have to let it break down before you add a ton of new material to it because it does have to have time. So those are, just a few other options of doing your hot or cold composting. So hopefully that interests you a little bit. And if you need more information, just let me know and I'll help direct you. Let's go to the next slide. So, compost uses. We already talked a little bit about why, but how do you use the compost once it's done? You can mix it into your garden soil. It'll feed your plants, help maintain moisture. You also can top dress it. So, like they were talking about, where you just put an inch of it around all of your plants, it'll act a little bit as mulch. So, it's going to retain that moisture in the soil. It'll also feed it as it rains. It'll go through and keep feeding your beds. So, let's go to the next slide. Now, we're going to talk a little about resources. The next 2 or 3 slides are different resources that you can use. Does anybody have questions as we start heading into these resources? We'll go ahead and flip to the slide and see if anybody has anything. So, general composting information, we've got a couple of different websites here. One is the MSU extension, which I gave you that site earlier, and you can just Google Master or Michigan State University extension, and the Smart Gardening will come up, and you can search here. There's also one called eartheasy.com, and it's all about they talk about growing compost, so just building your compost piles. There is free wood chips and mulch available so that you can add that to your compost pile, and you can just top dress your beds while you're working on your compost. Um, the It looks like there's one in Kalamazoo, in the Kalamazoo City. If you look at that website, it's kalamazooCity.org, and there's free firewood, wood chips, and compost available. There's also a service called getchipdrop.com. And what that is it's a service that you can sign up for, and local tree removal services. When they pull out trees, they usually have a ton of leftover or wood chips that or scraps and twigs and stuff that they just grind up. And so they have to have a place to put it. So they will bring you wood chips. Now you don't get to say how much, you don't get to say what you want. You get to say put them here and throw like a tarp down, or put a sign saying put mulch here, because you don't know when you're going to get them. But if you just happen to be close to where they remove trees, they'll go ahead and drop those chips for you, so you can get free wood chips. And then let's go to the next slide. So there's some different site sources for vermicomposting or worm composting. There's a book that a lot of people recommend called Worms Eat My Garbage, and wormwoman.com has a little bit more information because that's the author's webpage. And then there's actually a podcast that you can listen to on offthegridnews.com. They have a composting 101 little like a like a yeah. They have a little audio that you can listen to, and I think it's about 45 minutes long, and it just talks about how you worm compost, why, and all of those details. And then we have Gardening in Michigan, migarden.msu.edu. So that's a real nice, easy one to remember and look up. And that gives you a lot of information about just gardening in Michigan. Let's go to the next slide. And so, thank you. That was really all I wanted to talk about specifically on composting. And here's the little thing to turn ordinary clothes into gardening clothes, just mix with compost. So let's just have a little fun. I hope all of you do try composting. It's really easy. And it's actually kind of fun to see how you can go just from kitchen scraps and leaves and newspapers and cardboard and all of that, and just turn that into some awesome nutrients for your garden. So any other questions?
Mandy, I'm curious, what's the most the strangest thing you've ever composted or tried to compost?
There's I don't know if there's any strange, but there are compostable plates and silverware and stuff. The only problem is that doesn't actually work in a home composting setting. Of course, I didn't know that. So the next year I had, still forks in my compost, but now I know.
My
So yeah.
sister tried to do that for her wedding and compost in their backyard, and it was sort of like they had this memento every year when they would turn the garden that, oh, that's from our wedding.
Yeah, those compostable plates and silverware and stuff all have to go to an actual composting facility where it gets a lot hotter than your home compost pile will ever get. And, so that's something to know.
I have a couple of questions. I don't see many questions coming in in the comment section, but I hope we do get a few more. Have you done the hugelkultur mound, or is this going to be your first attempt?
This is going to be my first attempt. But I
Okay.
got excited about it because it just sounds like a great, almost its own ecosystem where it
Mhm.
just feeds itself. And I'm like, there's so much opportunity with that. And a there was a couple of videos on one of the raised garden bed sites where you can do it in your raised garden. And I was like, that's just going to be awesome because you can just build that into the bottom and it reduces the amount of nutrients, reduces the amount of water. It just helps so much with what you can do. So I'm
Mhm.
pretty excited about that opportunity to try that out and see how it goes.
I did one a few years ago where I wanted to build a little berm in front of my house to sort of be a visual barrier from the road. And so I decided, oh, I'll do a hugelkultur mound there, mostly with branches. I didn't get a lot of greens in there. It was mostly just branches and chunks of wood. Um, my biggest problem or challenge was that I dug this trench to put everything in, and we had a neighbor walking by that was kind of like, "Are you getting ready to bury someone?" Because it looked like a burial hole. But I didn't realize how much over time how much it would settle. So it
Yes.
started out as this nice big berm, and then a few years later it was just flat. It
Right.
was all gone, but nice rich soil in there. So
Right.
it was interesting to see, and it was a fun experience for me at least.
And that's one of the things about that hugelkultur is it's designed to do that. You're creating compost. You're creating this
Right,
great big mound and it's just going to break down into compost. So, yeah, I don't think it makes good berm, but it makes great garden bed.
right, it does. And the stuff that's growing, the flowers and so on that are growing in there now, are very, very happy.
Yes.
I've also heard that it's not good to plant a tree or anything like that in a hugelkultur bed because as it decomposes and compresses, it'll leave the roots sticking up out of the ground and so on.
Yeah,
So you have to think a little bit about that.
yeah, anything that needs permanent root structures probably won't like it settling over time.
Mhm. My other question was, can you compost in winter outside, or do you have to do it during warm weather in Michigan?
You can put stuff in your pile year round. It's just not going to break down much in the winter because it's just frozen and cold.
Okay.
So it's just going to sit there over the winter. You can still add to it, but it's just not going to do anything until spring, and it's probably going to be a little mushy and overly wet. So you may want to cover it because of all the snow. You may want to cover it and just maybe occasionally throw some snow in there just to make sure it stays damp, but not drenched in the spring like all of the rest of our yards are when the snow starts melting and it's all wet. You may just want to cover it to prevent you a problem in the spring that you're just going to have to sit there and wait for it to dry out. So it looks
Uh,
like
Dorothy sent in another question. She said you mentioned using newspaper as a brown matter. Are there other types of paper, junk mail, etc., that are toxic?
you don't want to use anything that's got that waxy coating on it. So if it's got that waxy coating, like those ads, even those ads that are those almost plasticky ads you get in the newspaper, you just want regular old paper. Newspaper. You can use junk mail as long as it's just the paper and not the waxy, you know, plasticky, waxy stuff. You know, those ads that are all like shiny and designed to flash. You don't want those. But if they just have the ones that are like the pink paper with your writing all over it, that they're just giving you a flyer, you can compost those. The only
What
reason
about
the waxy.
if you work someplace where they shred paper or something like that, shredded documents, can you put that into your compost?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Compost your documents away. Just shred them first. You
Right.
don't want to put
Right.
things, you don't want to put your newspaper in there as sheets because you're going to inhibit your
Ah,
oxygen, especially if they start sticking together. So you need to make sure you shred those up. Don't just throw them in as big sheets. They're gonna compact, and they're gonna prevent oxygen from getting in there, and they're gonna eventually start killing off the bacteria. You're not gonna compost nicely, so you're gonna at least tear them apart so they're not in big clumps. And if you start seeing clumps of chunks of like papers or chunks, even the leaves, if they get a little matted, you're going to break those up. You need to keep that oxygen in there.
what about something like cardboard or paperboard, like cereal boxes, that kind of stuff? Does that work, or is that too glossy?
I think the cereal boxes are gonna be too glossy, but your regular boxes are gonna be fine, like your Amazon boxes. Tear those babies
Mhm.
up and put them in there, and that helps you with your browns, because that's one of the things a lot of people have struggles with is they say, "My compost pile smells. It's not breaking down." Well, a lot of people put all their kitchen scraps, but they don't add enough of the browns, like the cardboards and the paper and the dried leaves and things like that. So you have to make sure you get those browns in there, or you're gonna end up with a smelly pile that you're going to be unhappy with, or at least your neighbor that sits next to it will be unhappy with.
So if Dorothy's getting started with a compost pile at her home in, where did she say she lives in Hillcrest, um, can she start now, or does she need to wait for warmer weather yet?
Start it now. There is no
Start it now.
reason you
Okay.
can't just start it whenever you are comfortable with going outside and getting your space set up. Just get started. You saw in the video they had some, people use your pallets. Take 3 pallets, enclose the 3 sides of your pile, and start it there. Those pallets are almost 4 foot, so you should be pretty close to the size you want. And that's actually a great way. If you can get free pallets, fabulous. Just throw those on and start your pile. It's even kind of hidden, so you're not, bothering your neighbors, and you can get started and know where your pile is. So I think that's a great way to get started, and it's free.
Great idea. Here at Community Homeworks, we have the benefit of having lights that go off automatically if we don't move too much. So I'm sorry that my screen has gone dark, but you can still get a little bit of light from the window. But
Oh, we
um,
see you. We still see you just fine.
anything else you'd like to add, Mandy?
I just hope everyone tries it. Just try it once, even if you can only do a small amount, if you want to just dig a hole in the ground and build compost, like put stuff in the bottom of your bed and throw stuff on top of it. You can throw some cardboard on top, throw your kitchen scraps, throw some cardboard, throw your garden soil on it, put it under your bed. It's almost a hugelkultur. But try it, because I think you'll find how much benefit your garden gets from that. That's really, it's going to be an amazing thing for your garden, and it's free. So let's hope everyone gets a chance to try it.
Right. And when you do try it, those of you who said you're going to try it, I'm going to check up on you to make sure you've done your homework. But take a picture or let us know some way, because we want to know that people are actually doing the things that we're learning about in class. You can send that to the address on the bottom of the screen and to the attention of Jason or something like that, and I should be able to get it. But yeah, that's a lot of great information tonight, and I think there's a lot of information that our participants can easily use to get started with this. I also wanted to stress to people that this isn't like rocket science. It's something that you can start off slowly. You can try things and see what happens. It's not going to, it's not going to cause an explosion if you do it wrong. It's not going to knock your house down. It's one of those. It's one of those home DIY activities that is fairly safe to try. So try it and see what happens.
Yeah. And if you do end up with any questions, I'm sure you can let Jason know and he will reach out
Yes.
and we'll get you
We
resources.
will connect you with Mandy. That's true. I wanted to thank Mandy for joining us tonight. It was a great class. Learned a lot, so I appreciate that. I also wanted to mention to those of you that are watching that in April we are planning to go back to in-person workshops. So we will be doing it a limited number of people. So we're not going to open it up to just anyone. You'll have to register first so that we are able to do some social distancing. We will, at least for the start, be requiring that participants wear a mask, but we will be in person and you'll get to see people and you'll get to talk to people and all that good stuff. At the same time, we're planning to also continue offering our workshops online for those of you that are not able to come out in person or not able to because of conflicts or because of health issues or whatever. So we will continue to be on YouTube and Facebook with those programs as well. It is going to be a little crazy till we get all the bugs worked out of those things, but I'm really looking forward to having people back in the building and learning about home maintenance items as well. So we're looking forward to that. Again, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. If you have comments or questions, please feel free to continue putting them in the comment section. I won't be monitoring it 24 hours a day, though. So if you put a comment there in the middle of the night, I'm probably not going to get it till the next day, but we'll work with it anyway. Thanks again, Mandy, for joining us. And thank you, everybody who wrote in with questions. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, guys.